Becoming the crocodile. If you stand only on the safety of the banks, spearing fish, how can you know the depths of the river? Can you fathom the darkness under a ledge of rock, or understand the life of the fish writhing on your spear? You mistake the teeth of the crocodile as the edge of the abyss, but the chasm is more terrible than teeth and certain. I fulfill the law, and the law demands your blood. I am Sebek, the crocodile, the catastrophe, the devourer, the necessity. Impaled on my teeth, you shall be blessed, for you will glimpse truth. I am only the secrets of your own dark heart, your lust, your greed, your anger, your flesh, to tear the darkness from your heart. I am the living power of water, the cry that catches in the throat, the sob that shatters stone. On my teeth you smell the stink of flesh. To you I seem a living horror. But I tell you in truth, I am your own soul, and it is with great sorrow that I crush the life you have made. I weep with the loss, but you do not believe. Such destruction is madness, you say. You do not understand. Is it madness to cut the wheat so that bread can be made? When you were born in this bright land, did you not weep for the lost dark of the womb? Whether or not you understand the law, you exist because of it. When you've reached the lips of the great devourer, you are staring into the jaws of creation.
That was from the Egyptian Book of the Dead, translation by Normandy Ellis.
Heresy shouldn't be this much fun, but it is. It just is, especially when you arrive to the Virtual Alexandria to Aeon Byte. And I hope you enjoyed that introduction, because it, I think, is tracks with our topic. Life and death, destruction and creation, the illusions we make and the gods laugh at us. And yes, we may not like Sebek, but I promise you we even have a more powerful force with us today, and that is Sekhmet. She will be with us, and she will protect us, and we will be fine as we go, as long as we learn about ourselves and we learn about the nature of reality, and more important, just being kind to our neighbors, kind to our cats, and so forth. My name is Miguel Connor, and I am your Pompatus of Gnosis, that madman across the waters, that smell of colitas rising through the air of a world gone mad. Yes, the war pigs are here. Where's Black Sabbath? But hey, what are we going to do? Well, we got to keep doing what we're doing, right? And today I'm very excited to have back Mr. Ronnie Pontiac. Ronnie, how are you doing today?
I'm happy to be here with you today.
And we will be discussing the latest book that you wrote with the dearly departed and much missed Tamra Lucid, and that is The Unobstructed Way, a true account of the exploration of life after death. And we're going to get Jungian on your ass too, because Jung plays a big part on that in this book. He just seems to be everywhere and always has an insight. What a mind, what a mind. And with us too, we've got the Moondog Vance. Vance, how are you doing today?
Oh, I'm fine. After a long day of work, I'm here. And tonight's subject is of great interest to me. I've been thinking a lot about, life after death, and, the true nature of us, souls, monads, all these different things. So, that's kind of the key, right, to understanding what life after death is what we really are. So hope to learn some.
You shall, you shall. And good to see already a good crowd there. If you're, for those of you watching live, yes, Sekhmet guide us. I agree. Hello, Graham. Hello, Oracle of Ralphie. I think I said hi in the chat real quick. And yes, if you have any questions, unless of course you are a new member or a member of YouTube, of course we will take them. Or Graham, I see Graham. Of course, if Graham has a question, since he is a co-pilot. But if not, please super chat them so we can get them in the din of the crowd, if you would. I'd like to welcome SVBT 2096. Thanks for becoming a member and supporting this Red Pill Cafeteria, as well as Catherine 8742. Appreciate the support and appreciate you being here. And of course, yes, I am putting out a lot of exclusive content. I just put out content on why you've been lied to about the Nag Hammadi Library as an article. Last week I did a stream on the Gnostic view of evil, and sin. And Graham yesterday gave us an esoteric overview of Charlie Kirk's death and how it's really a global phenomenon. I think Vance and I had our draws shot because, yes, Jeffrey Epstein, Ghislaine Maxwell, all these cats appear in China. The archons have gone global. It's like a dark force. So what are you going to do? Well, we are the solution to this. We are indeed the solutions. So Ronnie, tell us how you came to this book. I love reading it because it's like one of these figures that everybody should know about. And you're like, whoa. I mean, at the time they were like Paulo Coelho's, the Alchemist or the Power of Now. They were big, really big.
Yeah, they were famous. But I'm going to kind of go backwards here. I'm going to start with Jung.
Yeah.
And then he'll give us a glimpse into them, and then we'll talk about their lives and their teachings, and then we'll talk about the insane thing that happened with Tamra and I that was like a rhyme of their lives and a culmination in some ways. Mm-hmm. So most people think of Carl Jung as a psychologist, into alchemy and Chinese philosophy, an artist, of course, a Gnostic, but not a spiritualist. And yet Jung was deeply influenced by a medium and the books about her channeling, which were known as the Betty books. Mm-hmm. As we'll see, Jung actually had lots of experience with spiritualism. So in 1939, Jung beautifully expressed the essence of the teaching that is the subject of the Betty book and of my new book that I wrote with Tamra, The Unobstructed Way. He had received a letter from a pastor whose brother didn't let dying in an accident in Africa stop him from having a conversation. Jung wrote back to this surprised pastor, "Accordingly, the capacity to nullify space and time must somehow inhere in the psyche, or to put it in another way, the psyche does not exist entirely in time and space. It is very probable that only what we call consciousness is contained in space and time, and that the rest of the psyche, the unconscious, exists in a state of relative spacelessness and timelessness." And then 11 years later, Jung wrote a letter that summed it up in a single sentence. He said, "It is only physical phenomena that happen in a distinct place at a distinct time, whereas the spirit is eternal and everywhere." So Jung wrote about the Betty books that he would recommend to anyone who is interested in the psychology of the unconscious to read the books of Stewart White, who's the author. The most interesting to Jung was The Unobstructed Universe, which was their mega bestseller. It had to be published like twice every it was published once every 2 months when it was first published for a year, just to keep it in print. And Jung also loved a book that they wrote called The Road I Know, which he said was an admirable introduction to his method of active imagination, which is what he had spent 30 years using in his treatment of neurosis. So this book by a medium was something that he recommended to understand his way of treating neurosis. Publicly, Jung kind of hid his true opinion of the Betty books. He was very careful of his reputation and didn't want to be ridiculed for believing in spiritualism. So, for instance, he wrote about the Betty books that mechanistic thinking is one of the many Americanisms that stamp the book as a typical product and leave one in no doubt as to its origin. But it is well worthwhile getting to know this side of the American psyche, for the world will hear a great deal more of it in times to come. Ironically, this is a very interesting time to quote Jung about that. Yeah. But at the time, America wasn't this dominant power yet. So he's really just limiting it to the idea of, say, if you want a good understanding of the American psyche, read the Betty books. But this was just a performance, so he could demonstrate scientific credibility to reassure his skeptical peers. He was very honest about not liking Stewart's writing style. He calls it ghastly. And he says that although it contains ideas of fundamental importance, it's in a barbarous setting. And he still says, though, despite that, it's significant enough to be taken seriously. And the concurrence with the findings of his own psychology of the unconscious, he described as positively amazing. So here again, we have this strong endorsement and correlation between these medium-produced books and Jung's own psychology. He says that he'd like to see the Unobstructed Universe translated into German. And then he says again, if only it were written sensibly, but it's just all this insufferable gabble in it that would scare off an educated European reader. And no one likes picking out pearls from such a journalistic morass. But then he says in the next sentence, the book has stimulated me to no end. Well, he got his wish. There was a German translation published, and he wrote the foreword for it in a very neutral stance. He appears agnostic. He says he's willing to admit the subject is worthy of further attention, but it's as yet without solid proof. He suggests spirits are, as he calls it, exteriorized effects of unconscious complexes. He admits having observed telepathy and other psychic activity, which he calls activities of the unconscious, but he insists that they don't prove that there's such a thing as a spirit. But that was all a front, because in a letter that Jung wrote to his friend Fritz Kunkel in 1946, he tells his true opinion of the Betty books. Kunkel was best known as a psychologist, but he also studied sociology and religion, and he had this effort to put them all together into some master theory. Mm-hmm. In his letter to Kunkel, Jung wrote, I'm quoting him here, the really important book is The Unobstructed Universe. He says, Betty behaves like a real woman and not like an anima. And this is Betty post-death. Right. This seems to indicate that she is herself rather than an anima figure. I must own that with regard to Betty, I'm hesitant to deny her reality as a spirit. That is to say, I am inclined to assume that she is more probably a spirit than archetype, although she presumably represents both at the same time. So in other words, Jung considered Betty's posthumous communication as evidence of the survival of consciousness after death. So I did mention that Jung was very familiar with spiritualism, and this is something that isn't discussed very much. So I'm going to give you a few stories about this. There's a friend of Jung's who wrote about him and remembered him from college days. And he said that Jung would sit around late at night and discuss theories of spirits, and he would read aloud spiritualist authors while his dachshund would sit there with such a serious expression. He seemed to be pondering the mysteries of the universe. Right. And Jung would say that dachshund would react to occult presences in the room. Jung's mother left behind a diary in which she had recorded premonitions and all kinds of spooky experiences and strange phenomena. And her father, Jung's grandfather, had been so sensitive to spirits that he made his daughter stand behind his chair when he composed sermons so the dead wouldn't bother him. Mm. He also held weekly conversations with his deceased first wife, which didn't go over big with the second wife, as you can imagine. When Jung was 19, his 13-year-old cousin Helen acted as a medium in a series of family seances that Jung organized. And one of the spirits she channeled called herself the real Helen. And the real Helen was a confident, intelligent, somewhat sorrowful Jewish girl who claimed to have had many relationships with Jung during past lives. According to her family, the girl was in love with this dashing first-year medical student cousin of hers, but she pretended to be scientific and detached. And so did Jung, who was more emotionally involved with her than he wanted to admit. Helen is the one who gave him instructions for a mandala, the first time that he was exposed to the idea of a mandala, which became such an important theme in his philosophy and in his practice. And in a way, she was his first patient because he wrote his dissertation about her and the seances. But in the dissertation, he took a very cold and scientific eye to it. And he dismissed the spirits as fantasy personalities. He said that these were different aspects of her identity and different ways of relating to complex issues like sexuality, which took form in these flights of fancy. And stupidly or cruelly, Jung was too obvious in his description of her. So people figured out that she was the one, and she was doomed never to marry because gossip about her spread all over town, and she was considered crazy, and she wound up dying quite young, unfortunately. In 1916, as I'm sure you've spoken about many times, Jung himself became a medium, and he channeled his Gnostic classic, The Seven Sermons to the Dead, written by Basilides in Alexandria, transcribed by Carl Gustav Jung. And when he did so, he described how his house began to be haunted just before he channeled the messages. 4 years later, he would encounter a ghost in England, that's 1920, in a house all the locals knew was haunted. And he described knocks and odors and rustling sounds and echoed dripping, just like a horror movie. And he felt smothered and rigid. And then he experienced an apparition of a woman's head across the pillow from him, staring at him only 16 inches away. And when he lit the candle, it was gone. I'm like, Helen, is that you? You'll find all that about Jung in the book. There's more as well, but this book isn't about Jung. It's about the Betty books. So we're going to move on now to what was Jung talking about? Like, what are these Betty books? Who wrote them? What's in them? And the amazing lives of the two people responsible for them.
Yeah. Before we do that, Ronnie,
yes,
obviously we should talk about Jung's views. Obviously, the afterlife and all that was no big deal. He had a near-death experience in 1944, and he went all the way up. And that's when he got really Gnostic, because he's like, this earth sucks. He experienced things that he experienced the divine, the trueness. And of course, you know, and he had to admit, this is where I want to be. So he was never worried about, like you said, he had many supernatural or paranormal experiences. And I always thought it's interesting when he even said death is an archetype, but he never called it death. As we can, it should be called transition or transformation. That's the arc, because that's what death is. It's simply the psyche and everything going to its next mission or going back to the collective unconscious until it has to come out again. So I think that was, I don't know if you have anything else to add, but why are you going to tell us why he was so fascinated in truth about the Betty?
Well, we're going to find that there was a number of things in his own system and his own experiences of the supernatural and of the after death state that seem to be chiming with, if not derived from the Betty books, because he's reading the Betty books. The Betty books begin around 1925. And he's reading them all the way up until about 1940, and it's the one in 1940 that hits him the hardest, right before he has this near-death experience. So, in a sense, he's initially convinced about the reality of this survival. Even though he'd had these experiences, he kept a certain scientific skepticism about it, which I strongly resonate with because I was raised by atheists. Even though I've studied this all my life, I have a skeptical reflex. It feels to me like I cannot give it the just attention it deserves if I don't allow that skepticism to coexist. But there was something about the Betty books, which I hope to explain, that helped Jung to overcome that and then set him up for his own near-death experience and his absolute faith in it. It was almost like Stewart modeled the experience of death and dealing with his wife's death. And a lot of the concepts that come from the Betty books reappear in Jung. So it would take a long scholarly study to really find like which influence occurred when and whether it was something that deeply influenced him or merely confirmed something that he was already experimenting with or considering. But there's no question that in these books, that he seems to be a little embarrassed to admit that he was involved in. Even though he handed them out to his colleagues, he often would suggest to people that they read these books to understand his work better, as I mentioned earlier, that they prepared him for experiencing the after-death state. And this is the experience that I had as well, and that I believe Tamra had as well from reading these books. So it made us feel a sense of kinship with Jung as we followed these studies and found all these obscure references in his letters that were largely ignored.
Yeah, it really is incredible how everything ties in. It's Ronnie, like there's no time, right? Where it's like you guys are connecting at the same time.
Yeah,
Hold it over in space and time.
it is very strange. I'll get into that too. It's stranger than I ever imagined, and it's completely fractured my sense of reality and forced me to approach life in a very different way. Even though, again, I've been studying this stuff. I studied Jung and these materials for something like 30 or 40 years with Tamra, and deeply did so. But until you start to have these experiences, it doesn't really affect your rational self that wants to put a wall up between the experience and the ideas of the experience.
Exactly. Okay, you want to go to the Whites?
Yeah, they're an amazing story. They were such an incredible couple. I mean, of all the things in my American Metaphysical Religion book, this was the thing that really got Tamra and I. Like, that when people ask me if you could only talk about one thing out of that book, what would it be? It's always Stewart and Betty White, because their story is just so amazing. So Betty's mission was to demonstrate what she called the here-ness of immortality, because she said that most of us, if we have a concept of immortality, and many of us don't, that for us it's the there-ness of immortality, right? Maybe like when we die, we become aware of our immortality. But Betty's whole point was to demonstrate that immortality is right here. And the correlate with that is that consciousness is a starting point of everything. So you can take that in a number of ways, but she was presenting it literally, that there's nothing that we experience in this world that doesn't have consciousness at its root. That this is indeed a world made up of consciousness. It's not a material world that consciousness emerged from and is a kind of effervescent product of. It is a world of consciousness in various frequencies that is experiencing itself in a sense. The Betty books are concerned with that moment of human life described in the Tibetan scripture, the precious garland, which says that in the process of death, we all arrive at this strange experience, which they describe as when consciousness remains as an orphan with no support. The Invisibles worked with Betty to help her cross that threshold, to experience that. And the Invisibles were the name that the spirits took, because they said that the word spirits has all these weird connotations for people. So call us the Invisibles.
Like Grant Morrison. Don't confuse it with Grant Morrison's graphic novel.
Right, exactly. Quite different. So then this idea of being an orphan, let's talk about that for a minute. So as we live our lives, we have our body, we have our family, we have friends, we have our mastery of language, we have our skills. We collect throughout our lives keepsakes of our lives, things to remember it by, things that we hold precious. And we have again, friendships, we have pets, we have family. We have favorite articles of clothing. We have songs that we loved when we were in high school. We have films that really speak to us. All of these hundreds, thousands, uncountable almost things that all make us us, and that give us a sense of comfort of being in the world with some kind of friendship and some kind of collection of experiences and conversations that gives us hope and meaning. And so when we pass, this is all gone, right? All the little inside jokes, all the the deep connections with people, all the memories and such. I mean, according to the Whites, we do carry these memories with us. We don't forget them, but the physical presence of these things is gone. You won't be able to eat your favorite food again. You won't be able to hear your favorite song again. You won't be able to watch your favorite film again. All the things that you've defined yourself by and that have been held precious are gone, and all that's left is this naked consciousness. And it can be a terrifying experience if you don't get some kind of preparation for it. And this is why I think Plato described philosophy as really nothing more than preparing for death.
Right.
And in Tibetan Buddhism, of course, they talk about the bardos, where the soul can just tumble in dreams, basically, where it's the things it fears are demons and the things that it wants are gods. And it doesn't really know what's happening to it. It just sort of goes through all this chaos and illusion until it is drawn back into reincarnation and another attempt to achieve enlightenment, so that it doesn't have to forever be lost in this not knowing itself or the universe that it's in, just kind of being lost in the stories of others, attracted to what is attractive and also being brought into other people's attractions. And so not really choosing how to experience or how to live, but just being tossed about like some kind of flotsam on the ocean.
Sounds like a ghost.
Yes, exactly. And in the teachings of the Whites, in the unobstructed universe teachings, these souls are described as gelatinous. And they say that most human beings are gelatinous right now, because even in the 20th century, when they were writing already, there was so much stimulation, there was so much information, there was so much chaos going on around us, that people really didn't have a chance to stop and find the center, to find their core consciousness. And so they lived their whole lives that way, just sort of seeking pleasure and trying to avoid pain, as Freud pointed out, and therefore being unconscious for the most part. So there's 3 sentences that are central to these teachings. The first one is consciousness is everything, which is something we just discussed. And then another one is attention is existence. And so in part, this is how our beliefs define our experience of life. If we're sorting through our thoughts in fear of demonic influence, or otherwise offshoring the blame for human cruelty onto supernatural beings or such, then we're building the bars of our own prison. And when we are in this attention is existence meditation, it's also a way of describing how creation occurs and how we create our own lives. So we literally, according to them, create our lives here through the attention that we give to creating them. And I'll explain that a little bit later. But we also, as we live, our life becomes a sort of living symbol of what we have given attention to. So we must be very careful with that. And the Invisible said that attention, giving your attention to things is like a tax, or like you're basically giving up a little energy and a little time for everything that you give your attention to. So they wanted us to be very aware of that and to give our attention to things that will bear good fruits, and not lose ourselves in giving attention to things that later will leave us feeling drained and as if we never really lived, which is all too easy to do in a world where there's so much vicarious experience to have. And then the really key sentence to me is the individual is immortal. And this was the idea that any being, any consciousness that achieves a modicum of reason and will is an immortal that is evolving through successive lifetimes. And we'll explain that process. But that includes your cat, your dog. It doesn't include the amoeba, because it's too simple to have will. It's too simple to have rational thought. But when your dog is sitting there trying to figure out how to get a snack out of you, that is a sign of an immortal soul. So let me tell you a little bit about these people, because they were incredible. So Stewart Edward White's born in 1873. He comes from a family that his grandfather takes Indian trails into Michigan and becomes one of the founders of Grand Rapids. And he buys a place called Steve's Sawmill. And then he buys a bunch of land, and Michigan becomes like the lumber source for America for a while. And he's a millionaire like before 1900, which that was a lot of money back then. His son is sort of the guy who's taking care of the business, Stewart's dad. And Stewart is one of three brothers. Stewart is raised in a way where his father didn't want him to be like a rich kid. His father wanted him to really experience life. So he was a lumberjack. He was involved in gold mining. He was exploring frontiers in America and in Africa. He was just a kind of a man's man, a hunter, somebody who wrote articles about birds and was famous for his collection of birds that he had taxidermied, and all at a very young age. He was like a track champion, set a record for the 5-mile run. And he started to write, though, because he took an English class at Columbia University. And what he found was around that time he was working as a butcher, and he was making like $9 a week. And he made, I think it was $15 for one story. And he thought, wow, that's pretty good for sitting down and writing. And his father really didn't want him to write. His father was like most fathers of writers and said, this is a terrible way to make a living. You're making a big mistake. But he loved writing, so he kept writing. And his third book netted him $500 in an advance, which he just stuffed the money in his pockets because he thought there must have been some kind of mistake. He was the kind of guy who, for example, once he was on a trail in the Sierras and there was a slippage in the trail. He fell and he broke his leg. He dragged himself several miles back to camp. And on the way, he shot a game bird, dragged himself over, got the bird, and then dragged it back to the camp so they'd have something to eat. He was on a safari in Africa, and one of the porters was attacked by a leopard, and Stewart could not reach his gun. So in order to save the man, he literally strangled the leopard to death. Then he had it taxidermied. He was such an outdoorsman that a redwood grove, a sequoia grove, was named after him, still is, in California. At a young age, as a writer, he was noticed by Teddy Roosevelt. And Teddy was in California at the same time that he was, and said, get on my train. I want to meet you. I really love your book. And they became lifelong friends. And one of the reasons that Teddy was such a conservationist was Stewart. Stewart would take him out in the Sierras and show him these amazing places like Yosemite and as John Muir connections, and also was one of the people that tried to make Teddy be less disrespectful, even hateful of indigenous Americans, because Stewart had great respect for them. And in turn, Stewart wrote about Teddy that he was the best shot. Teddy wrote about Stewart that Stewart was the best shot with a rifle or pistol that Teddy had ever met.
Wow.
In 1904, he meets Betty. She's 6 years younger than him. She's about 5 feet tall. She's lived this incredible life growing up in luxury hotels in Bermuda and Panama and Florida. And her very wild background, like her mom's Panamanian and her dad's a Scottish Presbyterian. And they raise her up as to be this perfect aristocratic jewel. And then she meets this rough guy who's a writer. Her parents were horrified, and it took a year to convince them to let him marry her. And the first thing that they announced is, we're going on a honeymoon, just her and me, 4 months of camping in the wild Sierras.
I love that story.
And so her parents, of course, thought, my God, he's going to kill our daughter. But she absolutely loved it and was just a natural. And he said that this was when he first realized that she had a zest for life that made every experience that she had joyous. And she had that her entire life. Anything that they got into, she found joy in it, which is something very similar to Tamra. There were a lot of similarities between Betty and Tamra, and we'll see that it becomes mind-blowing eventually. So he told stories about her connections with animals. This is another thing that Tamra also had. Betty, for example, she would eventually convince Stewart to put his gun away and instead shoot animals with a camera because she was such an animal lover. And so one time they were out in the Sierras and a Kodiak bear showed up. And just, he said it was like 1,000-pound bear. And they're walking in a stream, in a large stream, and they turn a bend, and the bear is walking right toward them. And he's behind Betty, Stewart, and has no gun. So he's horrified by what could be a deadly encounter. And he said, Betty just looked at the bear and pointed at it. And she said, "Now you go away, bear." And he said the bear acted like a dog. He dropped his ears and he dropped down. He's kind of like, "Aw," and he like turned around and went the other way. There was an experience they had at a zoo in Santa Barbara. Santa Barbara used to have this big open air zoo back in those days, and they had lions. And there was a male lion there who was famously bored, just ignored everybody. And Betty went there and she stood looking at the lion with a rather poignant expression. And then she walked away. And as she walked away, the lion got up and he walked up to the very corner of the cage and he looked at her until she disappeared. And Stewart and a couple friends that he was with ran after Betty at that point, and they said, "What did you do to that lion?" And she said, "I sent him pictures of the African veldt."
Oh.
That's the kind of person that she was. And he said he had hundreds of these stories about everything from yellow jackets who would get on their boat and she would just point her hand out and the yellow jacket would fly away, and he'd say, "What did you do?" And she'd say, "I explained to the yellow jackets this is not a good place for yellow jackets to be." She had this wonderful rapport, and they were deeply in love all their lives. It's the most romantic story that I've found in the history of metaphysics. They lived like a honeymoon for their entire lives together. Their idea of a vacation was getting on their yacht, which was called the Reckless. And he said, "Careful how you spell it. It's with a W." And they would not have a crew. They would accept a cat. So it would be them and the cat. And they would take this yacht from the coast of Santa Barbara up to Alaska. And then they would camp out in the Alaskan wilderness in summer. And it was really a wilderness then. There was almost nobody there. Mm-hmm. And then they would come back down. So they were living this beautiful kind of magical life. I mean, even we'll see that during the Great Depression, when everybody's suffering, Stewart is selling books. He's getting books made into movies. He's got a yurt on the shores of Lake Tahoe where he's writing his books. But our part of the story starts in 1919 at a friend's St. Patrick's Day party. And the friend had been playing around with a Ouija board. So he brought it out. And they didn't use the planchette. They used a whiskey glass. And they were trying to get Betty involved. And Betty didn't like the idea. She kind of stood back. And they were having a great time with it. Stewart was a skeptic. He didn't believe in these things. It was just a party game to him. And the weird thing was, suddenly the board said, "Why are you asking foolish questions?" And then the board started going, "Betty, Betty, Betty." And she thought, "Now you guys are just fucking with me." like you're just trying to play a joke on me.
Right.
And they were like, no, it's really doing this. So eventually she comes over and puts her hand on the glass, and suddenly it starts going around in a circle. He describes it as like a happy puppy. And then all it will say after that is, "Get a pencil, get a pencil, get a pencil." And so she winds up a couple days later sitting in her vanity with a piece of paper and a pencil, feeling like an idiot. But to her shock, very slowly, like it takes a couple hours just to get a few words, but her hand is moving and she's not moving it. And she doesn't know, is this a ghost? Is this unconscious? What's going on here? But something's happening. So she shows Stewart. He's very skeptical about it. He thought that spiritualism had long ago been proven to be a fraud. Mm-hmm. And he said, "Frankly, I could not for a long time accept the invisibles for what they purported to be, but driven is the word. I was finally driven to it. It took a long time and a gradual accumulation of small logicalities rather than large evidences, though those did not lack. And finally, I could not reject the evidence. because rejection was ridiculous. But as she continued doing this, she like put a blindfold on and would turn away from the paper. It started to flow. And then these were just run-on sentences. She didn't know what she was writing. And Stewart would take them, and then he'd see, you know, where the periods belong, and then he starts reading it. And these are real messages with an elevated and fascinating philosophy behind them. And to him, he doesn't think maybe it's possible that it's coming from her unconscious, but it seemed like a completely different personality that was coming through. And eventually they produced so much material, and it was so convincing to him that it became his philosophy of life. And in 1925, he published the first of the Betty books. He did not reveal who the medium was. It was basically just, this is what my philosophy is. And yes, I got it from experimentations with a medium, but it makes a lot of sense to me. And I'm not presenting it to you saying you should believe it because it came from a medium. I'm just saying this makes sense to me. Betty thought she was a medium because she had an especially sensitive nervous system. And she believed that human beings would evolve more sensitive nervous systems, and that in the future, this kind of communication between the living and the dead would be as natural as talking to your neighbor. Right. So they produced a couple of books after that, and these books were fairly popular. So his publisher was telling him, yeah, keep doing this. People like it. It's resonating with people. And they started to work on a book called Across the Unknown, which was going to be published in 1939, the year that World War II started. They decided to reveal Betty's identity, because even in the book called The Betty Book, they said the medium was somebody named Betty, but they didn't say that it was his wife, Elizabeth. Mm-hmm. The book went into detail about the meaning of life and the purpose and experience of death, but it also had advice about how to live a good life. And so, for example, just to give you a sense of the kind of things they were teaching, it said the lower self, which is subject to faults like irritability and gluttony and destructive thinking, but don't treat it as evil or as an enemy. It's more like a tennis match or a friendly game. It's not Mortal Kombat. Now you can see this. This is a kind of Jung's shadow idea, right? You know, right there. So the Invisibles were dropping hints at this point, and had been kind of, if you look back, that something was going to change. And they talked about a lightening of density. They said that this would be an uncomfortable transformation, but it was necessary. And they compared it to the flower that crowns a plant, like that the work that they were doing with the whites wouldn't be complete until this happened. And Betty and Stewart were wondering, you know, what is this going to be? This is weird. Well, all of a sudden, Betty got really sick. She found herself in terrible pain one day, and she went to a doctor, and it was diagnosed as a terrible illness. Stewart figured, this is it. Stewart thought, we're going to heal you. This is going to demonstrate the power of spirit. And they had taught healing meditations and such. Mm-hmm. And so as she steadily got sicker and weaker, and even down to the point where she could barely speak a word, she'd have to rest in between words and would fall in and out of consciousness, Stewart kept fighting for her to stay alive. Mm-hmm. And he told her that their work together would be ruined if she didn't demonstrate this point as clearly as what they were talking about. And she even asked him sometimes, he records this, it's very sad, where she's saying to him, couldn't you let me go? Like, maybe, I mean, you know, I have to fight going at night, but I'll stay if you want me. He'd be like, no, you can't go. You've got to do this, you know? And so she's back home. The doctor is there, and Stewart's looking at her, and she's so weak, and she's lost so much weight, and he's very upset, obviously. He goes and he sits down in his favorite chair, and he realizes what he's done. And so he speaks to her in his mind, and he says out loud, Betty, if it's time for you to go, please do what you have to do. Go. Don't stay for me. I'm sorry that I did this to you. 2 minutes later, the doctor walks out, and he says she's gone. And the doctor says, but something really strange happened. And what happened was that she suddenly sat up in bed, And he said that she looked like the old Betty, and where she got the energy to do this, he couldn't imagine because she was so weak. But she suddenly was smiling and vibrant, and she said, "It's okay, Doc. I had a talk with my boy." And then she said, "It's okay. You can take me now." And she fell back dead.
Mm.
So Stewart, of course, is hit with, "Oh my God, she's gone." And then he writes about what happens next, and it's so beautiful. He describes it as this cozy, intimate feeling of companionship. Like sometimes when you're in the same room with someone you love, he says it's like when you're each reading a book, you're not talking, you're not even looking at each other. He says it's a tenuous, evanescent thing, and that we often fail to savor and appreciate it. And he says sometimes you have to be alone to make you realize how important it really is when it's not there. And he says it's like it's the bond of intimacy that's created by all the mutual habits that you have with someone you love, your travels together, your conversations, and even your most intimate moments are all about this feeling. And he says it's like this companionship. And he says that he experienced a flood of this that was 1,000 times stronger than he'd ever experienced it. And he knew that it was Betty and that she was just loving him from the unobstructed. And it completely washed away his sense of loneliness and his sense of doubt. And he said he felt a pure happiness, not despair, not devastation, a deeper happiness than he'd ever experienced before, except in what he says, I love the way he says this, brief moments when everything harmonized in fulfillment. Now, I think we know what he's talking about there. So he's got this deep happiness immediately after her death. And to him, this was proof of her survival. And he knew now he had to write a new final chapter for this book they had just finished. And he was going to relate this experience. And he thought, okay, this is what they were talking about. That Betty was going to die, and then she was going to come back and give me this incredible feeling that made me know that she's still with me. And so he wrote the chapter, and they got the book out there. And his life was very different. You know, she had an incredible collection of plants that she brought from all over the world. She filled Santa Barbara and Southern California with all kinds of plants that are now considered native, like the bird of paradise that she brought over. When she'd go on safaris with him, she would have a rifle, but she used it to shoot like seeds off of trees and stuff. And she would bring these seeds back and have them planted all around. The plants in their garden started to die. And he hired the best horticulturalists he could find, and they couldn't save the plants. It was like the plants just wanted to be around Betty. And once Betty was gone, they didn't care to live anymore. His friends started inviting him. This is, the year before Pearl Harbor, like in the year of Pearl Harbor. And they're inviting him, come to our house and stay. And he's, I don't want to stay here. It's big and lonely. And even though I feel her presence, it's still quiet. And she used to fill the house with laughter and joy. And I'm going to go stay with my friends. And everywhere he went, people asked him, are you going to do a seance? Are you going to talk to Betty? And he kept saying no. And he later admitted that he said no for two reasons. One was because he thought it was rude to interrupt her because he was feeling sentimental.
Right.
And then the other was because he was afraid to be a lousy seance and it might shake his faith. So he finally gets to the people that helped mentor he and Betty when they were developing these skills. And their nicknames were Darby and Joan, which was an old-fashioned slang term for a happily married couple. They were actually a couple of journalists. Joan was one of the first really feminist writers, and Darby was in the newspaper business. And they had also published a book right after World War I that was very famous. And they helped them to develop from automatic writing to full channeling. Although Betty never went completely out like Edgar Cayce or like Joan. She would be there while she was channeling, and she would make comments on what was being said. And sometimes she spoke in a voice that was not hers. And sometimes, according to Stewart, a voice would seem to come not from her, but from near her. So he finally gets to Darby and Jones, the last place he's going to stay. And Joan, of course, says, Stewart, do you want to do a seance? Do you want me to go do some channeling? And he said, yes, but don't get Betty, okay? Just use your own guide, and I don't want to talk to Betty. And she says, of course, we'll respect that. Well, of course, the minute she goes out, Betty just storms in. And the first thing she does is she calls him by a nickname that she never used publicly, which was Stewt. It was only between the two of them. And the first thing she says is, Stewt! Right. And then he describes it. He says, she starts talking to me quietly, fluently, with an assured, intimate knowledge of our common experience. No fishing, no fumbling. He said it was ridiculous compared to the other psychical research that he had seen. Hundreds, dozens of these authentications, just pouring out trivial facts of their mutual experience, things they experienced in their marriage. And some of it was so personal that he got embarrassed. And he said, well, oh my God, don't say that in front of Joan. And she said, Joan's not going to remember this. I'll give you one example, and a really good story. So Joan had this experience where she had been out shopping, and suddenly she felt compelled to get on this bus going the opposite direction from home to a store that she really had no reason to go to, but she just had to do it. And she gets into this store and she sees a red lacquer box, Chinese box with sparrows carved on it. And she's got to have it. So she tells the salesman, I want to buy this. And he says, I'm sorry, this is the last one and it's our sample. You can't buy it. And she's like, you've got to go look in the back. There has to be one. I have to have this. Sure enough, they find one in back. She buys it. Now she's back on the bus headed home and she thinks, what the hell? I don't need this. I have some of these. I don't even want this. Why did I do this? And so they're having their first session. And Betty says, by the way, Stewart, pay back Joan for the red lacquer box. This is a gift from my little sister, Millicent. And she says, it's the carving that matters. So Joan gets paid back for the boxes and relieved to find out that she's not going crazy, that this is part of some plan that Betty has. And he takes the box to Millicent when he gets back home. He says, did you ever talk to her about a red lacquer box? And she says, yeah. Actually, we were out shopping once in Chinatown in San Francisco, and I saw this beautiful one, and I wanted it, but it was so expensive. But then after I didn't get it, I wrote her 3 times saying, I really want one like that. Can you get me one? Do you know where I can get one? And she never responded. And so he says, well, here it is. And she's amazed by that alone. But then he says, she said that the important thing is the carving. And Millicent takes a careful look at the carving and she starts crying. And he says, Millicent, why are you crying? And she says, because they're swallows. And every spring, when I was a little girl, Betty would help me climb up a tree so I could watch the fledgling swallows in a nest. So that's just one of many stories. And Betty starts popping up everywhere. He's getting letters from people about apparitions of Betty and Betty giving people messages and practical jokes that Betty's playing. Her sense of humor completely intact. So then World War II starts. I mean, Pearl Harbor, we get in it. It's very interesting because she dies just before World War II begins, right before the Blitzkrieg goes into Poland. And then he lasts throughout the war and maybe a year later. So I almost feel like this work they did was about the war, that they were providing hope and mercy to people. And he had experiences like, for instance, he tells about this one young woman who was very frightened for her brother who was fighting the Nazis. And she had a bad feeling and she went to automatic right and she got the message, go find SEW. And he had turned her on to Stewart Edward White's books. That's why she was doing automatic writing. So she found him and showed up at his door. And when she told her story, he said, "Come on in, let's talk." And she said, "Can you go look? Can you see if he's okay?" And he said, "I don't do that." He said, "No." He said, "But I can talk to you about death." And he had a feeling, obviously. And so he spent a couple hours talking to her, and then she went home, and there was a telegram waiting for her that her brother had died in battle. And so she wrote him and said, "I don't think I would have survived if I hadn't had that conversation with you." And he had many such experiences, people writing him about things like, "My 2 dogs got murdered by some idiot, and are they okay? Am I going to see them again?" And he would answer very patiently and say, "Yes, they're individualized, they're immortal, they'll be there. Betty has her dogs. She's told me about it." And he kept writing books. There was over 1 million words that Betty had channeled. And he kept finding these incredible things. Like there was one big batch of them. And when he put all the first sentences of the paragraphs together, they made a perfect book. So let's talk about some of the concepts. The obstructed versus the unobstructed. So we live in the obstructed part of the universe. And because of our brains and our bodies and our senses, it's very limited. And this allows us to learn, basically. But we don't have the ability to, while we're in that obstructed state, to understand the cosmos, to understand the unobstructed, to communicate with it. We forget that we are from the unobstructed. The unobstructed isn't anywhere else. It's the same world that we live in, but it's seen from an unobstructed point of view. And so she gives the example quite beautifally of, if you go camping and it's dark, it's a cloudy night, the moon's not out, and you can't see anything. It's claustrophobic. Everything is black, and there's no horizon, there's no sky. It's just this darkness surrounding you, and then your little fire. She says that's what we're like when we're in the obstructed world. And then the sun comes up, and suddenly you can see the mountains in the distance, purple, and the sky, and you can see all the different colors of the trees and of the flora. And there's this huge, vast world around you filled with beauty. She says that's the unobstructed. She says another way of looking at it is it's like a black and white picture versus a color picture. It's a picture of the same thing, but you're missing so much detail in the black and white picture. And our experience of the obstructed world is very black and white. Mm-hmm. So her job was to learn, unlike most mediums whose job is, what was your past life? This is how you can heal your sickness, Atlantis, all that stuff. She didn't do any of that. She was all about this, about learning how to cross over into unobstructed consciousness and then teaching people how they could do that themselves, providing simple meditations and approaches so that they could awaken that unobstructed self. She described what it was like to become that, and she said that she was reduced to a single point of consciousness. She called it an essential atom of herself that she couldn't pin down in space-time. And from that perspective, she seemed to be everywhere at once, yet nowhere specifically. So again, everywhere at once, nowhere specifically. That's when we started. Jung described the same thing, right? So let's now look at how this happens, how we get here, and why we're here. So the meaning of life, according to these teachings, is about the quality and quantity of consciousness. When you're in the obstructed universe, you're stuck with the quality of consciousness that you have. So if you have a tree quality of consciousness, you are a tree, and you can't not be a tree. And if you're a dog quality of consciousness, same thing, human quality of consciousness. You can rise to a higher quality of consciousness only when you have completely gotten as much quantity of consciousness as is possible for the quality that you're living in. So you see sometimes there are those magnificent trees that are just you look at them and they feel sacred, and so much life is supported by them, and they're like absolutely essential to the ecology of the area where they are. This would be a tree that has accumulated so much consciousness as a tree. It has the presence of the divine. And it will not be a tree next time. It will graduate to be something else in which it can get more quantity of consciousness. And that's what we're doing as human beings, because as human beings, there are different levels of quality of consciousness for human beings. And we can get more and more quantity to lift ourselves into higher and higher quality of consciousness. And eventually we transcend being human beings because we have too much quantity of consciousness for a human life.
Mm.
And she said that this they asked her about, for instance, pets, dogs and cats, and does this mean that they were like, yes, they will continue to graduate up the evolutionary ladder. So we can assume from that you and I have been animals, and we've, trees ostensibly, and have worked our way up. And so that's part of the way the universe works. When we're caring for a garden or a pet loves us, we're giving them that desire to evolve, to communicate, to be what we are. Tamara used to joke around that when cats see us using our thumbs to open the food can, that makes them want to evolve thumbs, right?
Right.
And so they want more quantity of consciousness. They want to be in a body that allows them to do more. And so how do we actually create a body here? They called it juxtaposition. And what that is you have a frequency, and you put it together with receptivity, and you put that together with conductivity. Now, what is it? It's motion for frequency. Its receptivity is time, and conductivity is space. So you put together motion, time, and space through your imagination, and you create what they called an arrestment. It goes from potential to something that actually manifests into the material world. An obstructed creation happens through the power of imagination using juxtaposition. And as long as that thing exists in the material universe, it exists by what they called intraposition, which means that the consciousness that created that arrestment will have to stay there as long as that thing exists in the obstructed universe. And as soon as that consciousness is withdrawn, the thing falls back into its aggregate pieces.
Mm.
So some of the other things, there's a whole lot of fascinating ideas in here. I'm going to share a couple of them with you. So one of them is aging as a superstition. So the Invisibles taught that human beings hypnotize themselves into aging in certain ways. And we've all met people, sometimes you meet a 30-year-old and they look like they're 50 or 60, and you're like, my God, what have you been doing? And sometimes you meet a 60-year-old and they look like they're 30. And we usually say that's genetics. But according to the Invisibles, it's not. It's self-hypnosis and collective hypnosis. So you see, Hallmark cards that say, oh, you're 30 now, you're going to get a big gut and you're going to go bald, and there's a lot of peer pressure of, we're going to all have babies at the same time. We're all going to have diabetes at the same time. And then you've got this whole medical system that's constantly checking you for the things you're supposed to be developing. And so we're hypnotized into aging together. And Stewart uses Betty as an example of this, because he says that Betty, up until the very end, when she was in her late 50s, didn't look any different than she did when she was 25. She didn't have wrinkles or jowls, or her hair stayed its natural color. And I remember when I first read this with Tamra, like decades ago, and we thought, wow, that sounds weird. And he writes about it, and he's like, I know I sound like an infatuated husband, but this is something that people said constantly about her. Well, Tamra did the same thing. Like, I watched over the years as she just didn't change, and her hair stayed blonde the whole time. She never got wrinkles. She looked like she was 25. I mean, I was looking at her in the hospital bed at the end, and she looked incredible. And my belief is, and Jung, by the way, also had this idea as well, that when you're deeply in touch with your soul, in the teachings of the Whites, they compare it to, when you have a piece of paper and you drop oil on it and then it becomes translucent. Right. They're saying that that's what the soul does to the body, that when the soul is really living in the body, when you're conscious of your unobstructed self, and you're living a soulful, joyful, zestful life, you don't age the way other people do, because your soul is keeping the entire apparatus in its intraposition of it in this state of purity, in a sense. It's you're spiritualizing the body.
Right.
So they were teaching this idea that that while we all expect to find that there are certain things that happen as we get older, we may not be able to run out there and play sports like we used to, or things like that, when we're toward the end of our lives, but that we can avoid experiencing a lot of the illnesses and a lot of the debilitations that we've come to expect out of life, and that people cause to happen. Because one of the things that they talked about that I found fascinating was, people worry about possession by spirits, demonic possession, especially when you're talking about spiritualism. And from a Christian point of view, they always worry about, well, you're going to get possessed by a spirit. And the teachings of the Invisibles taught that there's something much more dangerous than possession by a spirit, possession by the living. That your family or your friends, or you're somebody who decides you have to be this. I want to be a musician, but no, you're going to be a doctor. The person who watches you for signs of illness all the time because they're neurotic about it, and they create the illness in you, in a sense, by convincing you and hypnotizing you that you're going to get sick any minute. Or people who watch your behavior and try to control it, and that they all these people are possessing you. It's being possessed by the living. And if you're lucky enough to get away from it, they say you can feel like you wasted your whole life. But they said, don't feel that way, because it's just that freshly free from it, you can't see your destiny. But your destiny will reassert itself once you get free of that possession by the living. And that happens so often through jobs and family life and relationships.
Constant, yeah. Really
something to look out for. So how do we do this? How do we get into that state? Really, it all begins with relaxed appreciation. It's that simple. The idea that when you meditate, when you pray, you begin by remembering the best moments of your life, the greatest beauty, the deepest love, and you feel appreciation. You bring yourself back to appreciating life, because this opens your heart and it opens your mind, and it opens the way for the magic of love and the magic of fun. And that's key to this, because whereas most of the religious systems are so serious and solemn, and they were like, no, if it's like that, you're off. Like it's got to be fun. One of the things that they said was that here's a reliable and simple test for any spiritual path. If it makes you feel anxious, exhausted, or depressed, you are on the wrong track. Also, though, if it makes you feel exalted and elated and extravagant, you're also on the wrong track.
Right.
Like, it's got to be peaceful and carefree. And it's in those peaceful, carefree moments that you're most available for spiritual contact. And so they describe these two states of being. One is called the vortex, which is where most of us live, unfortunately. Right. And in the vortex, everything's miserable. Everything is a fight for survival. Everything is infused with death and competition and doubt. And we kind of go screaming through life in this state of apprehension and anxiousness. But what we should be able to accomplish, they called spiritual stability. And spiritual stability is something you get through spiritual contact. And spiritual contact is simply having that appreciation, practicing that appreciation, taking a moment to meditate, beginning with that appreciation. And they do give some exercises, and very simple stuff, though, just visualizations essentially to relax you. And that spiritual contact builds spiritual vitality and spiritual stability. And then you're able to go through life without getting pulled into the vortex by other people. They talk about people who are energy vampires, right?
Oh, yeah.
And they say, this is how if you have your spiritual stability and your spiritual vitality, you literally repel them like that. You may even be an example that converts them out of the state of being lost in the vortex. They compared it to visiting somebody in a hospital room. And for many people, when you go into that hospital room, you start feeling the person's illness. You start getting this kind of hypochondriac reaction. But if you bring in your own self and your health and your vitality and your stability, you help that person because there's a presence around them now that is the presence of health. So this is just a taste of it. There's a whole bunch of it. It's in the book. There's also some videos that are on my YouTube channel that go into greater depth and that give you the meditations and their history in more detail. And this is just barely scratching the surface of their teachings and their view on life. But I want to come around now to how this worked for Tamra and for me.
Sure.
So I want to start out by saying who I am and what my background is, because when you hear this about the Whites, you think, well, yeah, I mean, they had these completely lucky lives. They were rich, they were happy, so they did this. They had the money to spend 30 years doing this stuff.
Yeah, no kidding.
And then they crossed over, and now they're saying, "Well, you can do it too." So that's not the story of Ronnie and Tamara at all. And so before I met Tamara, I had a terrible life. My parents were war survivors. They were refugees. They were extremely unhappy atheists. They were really fucked up people, and they didn't trust Americans. So I wasn't allowed to socialize very much as a kid. And I was this weird, alienated runt kid, really bright and kicked up, by grades and consequently beaten up constantly. And one of my earliest memories is staring longingly with an almost erotic longing at the poisons under the kitchen sink. Mm-hmm. And I had like this glow in the dark pumpkin and a skeleton that I would light up at night when my parents were asleep, and they would talk to me and basically tell me, it's going to be okay, kid, like wait it out, don't give in to the snail poison. And by the time I got around into my teenage years, it struck me that I did not have a social contract, that between how I was treated at school and how I was treated at home, I didn't know anybody anything.
Right.
And so I decided that I was going to take it out on the world. I was going to share my nihilism. And I started a band that was a nihilist, racist band. I was really a criminal. I was very violent. I was a thief. I broke into places. I was practicing a very early form of chaos magic that I made up myself, kind of out of reading Crowley and Spare. And I was devoted to doing bad things. And I got involved in a lot of bad things. And my band was very popular with bikers. So our guest list used to say anyone wearing the colors of the Satan's slaves or the devil's henchmen. And they would sometimes act as security, So if I did some violent, weird thing that I deserved to get my ass kicked, there'd be people there who would protect me and kick somebody's ass on my behalf. And for somebody who had been such a, nobody, it was a very powerful feeling suddenly to have all this deployed power, And I had a terrible reputation in town, but we kept getting gigs because the bikers drank so much. The clubs made a lot of money, They bring in like off-duty police, and there'd be fights between the bikers and the police. But then they'd look at the tab and be like, "Oh wow, okay, yeah, we'll book them again." Mm-hmm. So it was around that time. I was about 20 years old, and I was at a club one night. I was there with my drummer. We were trying to find my guitar player, who had gotten this brilliant idea that, I think I really just want to have girls and money, and you're nuts. And I don't want to be around this crazy shit because something horrible is going to happen. And he was right. I mean, I almost killed us once just to prove a point to him. He was telling me that he thought that, he said, well, you're just putting on a shtick like Jim Morrison or Alice Cooper. And I was like, no, I'm not. And he was like, well, yeah, you are. I went, really? And I just crashed into a car. I was like, yeah, watch this. And so obviously this convinced him that he needed to get into another band. And my drummer, who was as crazy as I was, his idea of fun was going to a local burger joint on Friday nights and having fights with the football players that people would bet on. And he never lost a fight. He came driving down from Sacramento, and he was like, let's go to this club and find this guitar player and make him rejoin the band so we can play some gigs. And I said, how do you make him rejoin the band? And he said, simple. I'll tell him, if you don't fucking do this, I'll break your fingers. And I was like, yeah, that could work, you know? So I'm down there at the club, and that night, Tamra happened to be there. And neither one of us was actually old enough to be in the club. And she really looked like somebody that shouldn't have been there. I could tell from how she was dressed and stuff. This was not a regular. And unbeknownst to me, she had been kind of put in a bad position by a friend of hers that had gone there with her, who had attracted the attention of a band of 5 guys who'd just come into LA. And then had split because she saw somebody who looked like her favorite rock star and decided to try and pull him. And so Tamra's stuck with these 5 guys, and Tamra had already experienced rape and terrible abuse, even within her family. And she, like many abuse survivors, she had that freezing thing, you know, like when you get in trouble, but you freeze. And these guys could tell that, and they started to plot how they were going to get her. And she knew what was happening, but she didn't have a ride, and she didn't know how to get out of the situation. So she started to look around. She thought, I got to find somebody to protect me. I've got to find a way out of this. And she saw me standing off in the corner, dressed all in black, smoking a black Russian cigarette. And she thought, that guy could protect me. The guy who ran the club saw her looking at me, and he walked up to her and he said, you look like a nice girl. Stay away from that guy. That guy is bad news. So she decided not to. But then when it came around to 2 a.m. and these guys were all over her and she realized, I have to do something, she saw me standing outside in the rain smoking a cigarette. And she walked up to me and looked up at me and she said, please help me. I'm in trouble. Can you imagine? It was like I was like Satan standing there. I pulled knives on my own band members. I mean,
you were the Kodiak bear, though.
You know, I was just like, but it moved me. Like this poor girl, she looked so nice. So I said, "What's going on?" And she told me. And something territorial like woke up in me, as well as something chivalrous. Like the territorial part was, these motherfuckers come to my town. And this is a local girl, and they think they're going to just force themselves on this girl. Like, no, it's not going to happen. And also, though, I felt this sense of I've got to protect this girl. I don't know where that came from, but it was there. And so that night, I was with her, and sure enough, they were there, you know, and they were drinking beer in the kitchen while she was talking to me. And she's telling me all about her boyfriend she had for 3 years, her high school boyfriend. He's got a great job working in the studios. He bought a house at age 19. And all of this really means I'm not a punk girl. I'm not a rocker girl. Like, I don't do stuff like this. And I realized it. And I was thinking to myself, God, have I sunk low? I mean, I'm protecting some other guy's girlfriend. I mean, what? So they made their move, and they were kind of bargaining and trying to make it happen. And I was really angry, and my drummer was really angry. And even though it was 5-2, we scared them for good reason, because we would have really fucked them up. And they split. And I said, okay, are you okay now? And she was like, no, you know, if they see you leave, they could just come right back. By now it's getting close to dawn, and my drummer is driven all the way from Sacramento. And I'm like, look, you know, what do you want to do? And she said, well, my brother's going to be back home in the morning. She said, can I just go sleep on the floor at your place just until I can get home? And I said, all right, you know, sure. So she followed me back to my place, which was this little closet near the whiskey. And I gave her a blanket for the floor. And to my shock, she showed up sitting on my bed. And I figured, oh, wow, chivalry has its rewards, you know? And so we made love at dawn, and it was the most incredible experience that either one of us had had. You know, we were both experienced and we were both skilled. It wasn't that. It was love. I didn't know it. I just knew that I'd never felt anything like that. She knew. She went home and said, I think I just met the love of my life.
Mm.
I was thinking, oh my God, like, is this love? Because that's bad. Like, that's going to fuck me up completely. I had a thing going where I had different girls on different nights, and they were bringing me food and money and booze and drugs. And I was just like, I cannot do this. But 2 weeks later, I found that when I was with other girls, I couldn't stand it. I just wanted to be with Tamra. When I was at rehearsal, I wanted to be with Tamra. So, scariest moment of my life, I asked her to move in with me. And she said yes, to my shock. I couldn't believe it. I was like, why would you leave a long-term relationship with a winner buying a house at 19 to move into my closet with this crazy, you know, I just couldn't believe it. It was beautiful. And it was like the sun came up in my life, and it stayed there for our entire lives together. We had a most amazing, magical life. Like, she turned out to be the most incredible person, and the adventures that we had were just incredible. And we were infatuated with each other throughout. Like, most people are in love, and then they kind of go in, oh, yeah, we love each other.
Yeah.
We weren't like that. We were like in love from day one to the last day, and falling in love with each other constantly. Maybe because we were always reinventing ourselves, and we always put love first. Like, love and magic were first. So when she had the opportunity with our band to become famous, and you know, she was like, no, that's not going to be good. I don't want that. That's not going to be good for creativity. That's not going to be good for magic. And it's not going to be good for love. And we judged everything that way. And our friends thought we were crazy, but it led to this beautiful life filled with synchronicities, and, you know, got to work with Manly Hall, and got to be great friends with Manly Hall, and then got to tour the country with our band, and made great movies with people like Edward James Olmos and all kinds of cool people, and just one adventure after another. And Tamara's the one who got me into these books now, to tie it up, because when we were at PRS, she was told by this incredible psychic that we met, a trance channel who was a Cherokee and also a Taos Pueblo shaman. And he said, you need to read the Betty books. And she tried a bunch of times, and I think she was like Jung. She just hated the writing, and she couldn't get through it. She was like, I cannot, what is this guy trying to say? Like, he just takes forever to get to the point. And one day she said to me, Ronnie, I really want to know why he wanted me to read these books. Will you translate this for me? Like, will you read it and translate it into modern English?
Clip notes. Yeah.
And I said, yeah, let me do it. And when I started reading them, they blew my mind. So we spent, 30, 40 years reading this stuff and working with it, doing the meditations, and it was life-changing. We were just amazed by it. And finally, Tamra decided in 2024, she was like, let's make this a book. We published 4 books at that point, and she was like, she said to me, this is the dearest to my heart. Like this, the other stuff is all history, even the stuff about Manly Hall. I mean, I love it. I loved him, but it's still just history. This is life-changing. Like, this could really do something for people like it did for us. So we started to work on it, and then we finished it in June of 2025. And just like Betty, like a month later, she got sick. Mm-hmm. She had not been sick once. She had not seen a doctor the whole time. I mean, the most unbelievably healthy person, and plenty of bad habits. She loved junk food and cigarettes and hash and all kinds of stuff, and yet stayed incredibly healthy all her life. And then one day she was messed up, and I wanted to call an ambulance. She forbid me. She was like, I'm going to be okay. Just, let me deal with this. And 5 days here of sickness, and I found her unresponsive. Mm-hmm. And so I called an ambulance. They told me to do CPR on her immediately. She died in the emergency room, but then they brought her back, and she was coming back strong. They said she was a miracle of healing. And I was kind of like Stewart, I was
That's
like,
good,
come on, we're proving it. We're proving it. Like, this is it. Right.
yeah.
And, but there was medical malpractice. They messed up, and they told me she'd be home in 2 days, but on day 5 she was gone. And we've been together every single day. We did all our work together. She was my guitarist, my editor, my co-author, my lyricist, my singer, my yoga teacher, my martial artist, so my bodyguard, just on and on. I mean, she was everything to me. Plus, she was like Betty, this woman with an incredible zest for life and sense of humor, and just, the house was always noisy and filled with laughter, and she made even unpleasant experiences joyous with her sense of humor, and and a tremendous impact on people. If you see her celebration of life, which is on my YouTube channel, and you were kind enough to be involved in it, the testimonials about her and her life story. I mean, even I lived it with her, and I was still blown away while I was doing it. I just like what she did, and she did it all so humbly and so authentically, and incredible. I've never seen anything like it. She didn't let anything take her down, just kept going. And if her muse moved her into a whole new area, she did it. And I think that's why she was so filled with life and this almost bodhisattva-like effect on people. Her incredible timing of her compassion, for example, and her activism, which, as you pointed out, was just tremendous in so many different ways, as a riot girl, as a filmmaker, and as a writer, just a journalist. I mean, incredible. Teaching martial arts to girls who'd been abused. I mean, all this stuff. So after she passed, I was, of course, devastated. I'm no Stewart. I didn't really practice the way he did either, and I certainly didn't have his life. And the thing that made life livable for me and made it joyful was taken from me, and I felt broken, and I did not know how I was going to survive. And first week I didn't sleep. My bass player, Grit Maldonado, was kind enough to stay with me. She was a godsend, but I couldn't eat, I couldn't sleep. And I did have friends visit, and one of my friends who's into this stuff said to me, wouldn't it be something if Tamra pulled a Betty, And we started hearing from her, and I was kind of, yeah. But I figured she never did the exercises. She was never a medium. She didn't, I mean, what would make you think that she could do this? Well, one morning, as the second week began, I realized that I was going to have to deal with some horrible things: cremation and death certificates and lawyers and accountants and just all the ridiculous things that this society makes you go through when you're completely bereft after the loss of someone you love. And I didn't know how I was going to do it. I really was just in despair. And that Monday morning at dawn, I thought about the Whites and about their appreciation meditation. I couldn't meditate, but I did lay there in bed and talk to Tamra and just tell her all the things I love about her and on all the great things that we did together, and just appreciated her. And then I fell into this liminal state that was amazing. It was like light. All I saw was light, and I got a glimpse of her hair and a glimpse of her shoulder, but it was like she got on me. And the only way I can describe it is as a soul fusion. There was no talking, there were no words. It was almost like an orgasm, but stronger and longer, and it was just her and me fusing. And when I came out of it, I was smiling and I felt all this joy. I was just like, oh my God, like what just happened to me? And she had somehow given me her perspective, which was that cremation and death certificates are trivial. These are the trivialities of the material world. They're like little ashes left over after you finish smoking your blunt, like you don't worry about that. You clean it up and you move on. The living soul still there. So that was very powerful, and it helped me to continue on in my life. But the absence of her physical presence was still agonizing. I mean, all the things that I loved about her, all the things that change, you know, you have a whole life with somebody like that, especially an incredible creative life like that. And you know, I still can't pick up my guitar. I learned to play guitar with her, and we always played together. And I feel so many things are foreign to me because I'm not doing them with her. Or as friends tell me, they can't get used to saying Ronnie because they're so used to saying Ronnie and Tamara all the time. And so about a week after that fusion, I was really desperate. And I said, Tamara, you got to show me something. I mean, if you're really here, like, do something, please. So in our kitchen, we had this fan. It's about 3.5 feet tall. And Tamara would run it day and night because she loved it. If it was hot, it would cool it down. If it was cold, we had the heater on. It was stuffy. If she was smoking, if she was cooking, like, this thing was on, and she'd leave it on all night. And I had read a review that said that the thing was a fire hazard. So I started nagging her about it. You know, I'd come in and shut it off when she was gone. I would tell her, you know, you've got to stop doing this, girl. Like, just turn it on when you get in the room, and then turn it off when you leave, because you're going to burn the house down. And I figure, you know, all human beings, men and women, we have within us a neurotic housefrau. And certain situations bring it out. And for some reason, for me, it was the fan, you know. And I got on her nerves. And so she gave me this nickname that she never, ever said in front of anybody. And she would look at me and she'd say, okay, Mildred. And so that kind of shamed me, you know. Didn't want to be called Mildred. And then when she passed, it was one of the things that I regretted. And I thought to myself, man, you know, I made her call me Mildred. And so when I was asking her to show me a sign, that fan turned on. I went over to it and I was like, okay, bullshit. I was like, you know, is there a timer on this thing? Is it plugged in loosely? Did a cat hit it? Like, no, the thing turned on. So I was like, you know, I told you I have a skeptical reflex. So even though this happened, and it was so Tamra, I mean, that's Tamra's sense of humor. Of all the things she could have done, what did she do? She turned on the fan that I didn't want her to keep on all the time.
Of course.
And so I then the next day was telling a friend about it, and he's into this stuff. And I said, man, I think that's Tamra. And he said, Ronnie, of course it's Tamra. So I go downstairs, the fan's on again. This happened 9 times. It never happened randomly. It always happened after I spoke about it. I go down there, suddenly out of nowhere, this thing is on. So that was nice. You know, it was like, okay, I would dream about her. Sometimes she was giving me messages. She like, I had a really bad time around in late December. Her birthday and Christmas and New Year's were big holidays for us. I was very proud of the amazing gifts I would buy her every year, because she was one of those kids that got cheated out of gifts because her birthday was so close to Christmas. And I was miserable, and my old personality was waking up. I started to get angry and hateful about the world. I felt like, you know, the world was okay because I was like, if a world can make Tamra, then it can't be all bad. But now that same world took her away from me. So fuck, what do I owe this world? And on New Year's Eve night, I dreamt about her. She was sitting across from me and she was looking very serious. And I said, do you see how much pain I'm in? And she said, yeah, I'm watching you. And the show really sucks. Mm-hmm. Again, so Tamra. And that woke me up. I woke up laughing, and it made me realize, yeah, well, I've got to put on a show for this girl. Like, I'm auditioning. I want her to want me. Like, I want her to go, damn, why didn't I get that Ronnie? Like, that's the Ronnie I want. And then the kicker. So I get an email from a woman that we didn't really know very well, somebody associated with the Theosophical Society, not a medium. And she says, Ronnie, I've been talking to Tamra for 3 months, and I've been getting the courage up to write you so you can tell me, am I crazy or am I really talking to Tamra? So I'm like, okay, let's see. So how about this for a message that she gives me? Tell Ronnie to tell Mildred that I love her. Now, one, how do you pull the name Mildred out your ass? I mean, forget it. And then, but then that it was pitched at my regret, that it was
Right.
saying, hey, Ronnie, I love Mildred too. I know what you were doing. You cared about me. That's just a little taste of the kind of things that have been happening, because I started to get like, Ike Baker saw her, like she actually did a physical apparition in front of him.
In front of Ike? Wow.
Yeah. She did a physical apparition in front of another friend of ours. She did tons of like audio apparitions where people would hear her telling them things. There would be like, I would get 3 notes from 3 different people who didn't know each other at all, telling me, Tamra told me to tell you this, and it would be the same message with all 3 people. And then I got more stuff from the person who came by with the Mildred thing, and they were just like, again, mind blowing. I'll give you one brief example of it. So, I've been working out, and I can see our garden where I work out, and I noticed we have this new mockingbird, and he's been singing really beautifully. And I noticed that he'd found a mate. We'd had a really bad storm, and we had like almost tornado level winds here. I've never seen anything like it. It was the coldest I've ever felt here. But now it was sunny, and there was raindrops on everything. And these 2 mockingbirds were like dancing together among the raindrops, like they were Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers. It was just adorable. And so and Tamara was deeply into the mockingbirds. She had taught earlier mockingbirds special whistles, and I would listen for those whistles, right? And this mockingbird knew one of them, so I was like, wow, are you related? Like did you learn this from somebody that Tamara taught this to, or are you one of the ones that Tamara taught? And it reminded me of this this baby mockingbird incident that had occurred, where we were working on this film called Exile Nation, the Plastic People, and Edward James Olmos was coming over to our house to record the narration for it. He was the executive producer, and he comes up the driveway and he sees Tamara for the first time, and she's wearing white gloves, and she's creeping around by the cars, and he's like, what are you doing, girl? And she says, I'm looking for a baby mockingbird. Do you want to help? And he did. So now you've got Edward James Olmos is down there looking for the mockingbird, and they found it. And so Tamara puts it back up in the nest. She was wearing the white gloves so it wouldn't smell like a human, so the mother bird wouldn't reject it. And that mockingbird grew up, and it had zero fear of Tamara. Like, we got to see it the first time it was running around in the garden, and when it saw her, it ran right toward her. And it was just beautiful. So it made me think about mockingbird babies. And I said out loud to Tamara, hey, Tamara, look, we're going to have baby birds. One of the messages I got from the clairvoyant the next day was baby birds chirping. And that was just one out of 20 messages that were all that accurate. That were like, so it's like Stewart said, when you get this piling on of evidence, it becomes more ridiculous to doubt it than to believe it. And that's why I said in the beginning that it's like this fracturing of my sense of reality, because the part of me that skeptical reflex comes from it's gone now, because this is too many things have happened that are clearly Tamara, and she's still working with. The weirdest thing is, she's mentored a number of women, artists, and of various kinds, and they're dreaming about her, and she's giving them advice and helping them with their work and encouraging them, and it's just really surreal. So I'm now trying to like navigate this new world that I'm in, and it's taking time to. I know now I've got to kind of lift myself. I want to have better communication with her in the way that Stewart had communication with Betty.
Right.
So I don't have to be getting it through other people. And so I've been working on my meditations and just trying to get myself to the level where my unobstructed self can communicate with her on the level of the unobstructed. And it's a great motivation, someone that you deeply love. I mean, there's no more powerful reason to want to develop that ability and to develop your highest self than to be able to have that sense of communion with a person that you love more than life itself. And so the ultimate message, I think, here is that all of these things, when you look at the whites and the experiences that I've had, that it's like Marsilio Ficino said, that the whole power of magic consists in love. And I think that a lot of people apply that in the sense of like manifestation magic, like you get what you love. But I think it goes much higher than that. And I think that's kind of what the whites were teaching. They were saying that when you really love, whether it's a person or life, that you can ride that love to the unobstructed consciousness. You can achieve that level of spirituality and that level of conscious awareness of the part of you that is not obstructed. And this is exactly what Manly Hall taught. This is exactly what Plato taught. This is what you find in the Taoist alchemical tract, The Secret of the Golden Flower, this idea that our restricted consciousness is not our natural core self, that our true self is, as Betty described it and as Jung described it, it's free, it's everywhere, and yet it's nowhere. It's eternal. It's outside space. It's outside time. And yet it's in all time and space. And yet it's still individual. Betty still had her sense of humor. Tamra still has her sense of humor. And I think that the reason that it happened with us in the way that it did was to show people that, no, you don't have to be, rich enough to spend 30 years practicing mediumship and special meditations to do this. A couple of slobs like Tamara and I, who had horrible beginnings and who didn't do our meditations and who didn't do the practice the way we were supposed to, we did it. Well, she did it. And if she could do it, you can do it. It means that it belongs to all of us, that it's a human, natural thing, because it's what we really are. And so it even goes back to something that I believe I spoke to you about a while ago, is just the ancient Orphic beliefs, right? Mm-hmm. I'm a child of earth, but of starry heaven.
Right.
I'm obstructed, but I'm unobstructed. And it seems that this is what our experience, this weird, Mark Twain said, history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. It's even weirder that, that Betty died right before World War II started, and Tamara dies, and now we're in a war, and it's people are worried it's going to be a world war because it's affecting so many countries. This rhyme, it seems to me, has the point of showing that, no, this wasn't the sport of aristocrats. This is available to anybody. If a couple of punk rockers who had the kind of beginning that we had, my background, Tamara was always special, but me...
Ronnie, I don't want to interrupt, but yeah, we're hitting almost 2 hours, and we've got to wrap it up.
Yeah, that's the end of it right there.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just saying.
Said, very inspirational.
Definitely.
All hail Sekhmet, that spirit, that lioness. Yeah, and every point in time is together. I see it. So before we wrap up, Vince, any super chats?
Oh, yeah, we do. First of all, we'll go and say hi to Catherine, a new member. And sorry to rush through these, but I know it's late. Here's someone else that loved your conversation, Ronnie.
Thank you, Paper City Dolls.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
And we have a question from Stephen Hill. He wants to know if there's a relationship, extension, or regression between the unobstructed universe and A Course in Miracles. And he loved your storytelling.
I think that there is. I'm not going to go into any great depth, but if you think of the miracle as being the unobstructed, the miracle part of what the Course in Miracles is describing relates to the unobstructed. and the life that you're leaving as you begin to be able to relate to those miracles is the obstructed.
Very good. And let's see, we've got a Frank Sidebottom appreciated you enough to give us a super chat. And here's somebody else that appreciated your story is the best. Big love to you.
Oh, thank you. That's very kind. Thank you.
You are an amazing storyteller. I can't believe, how clear and, just descriptive, just right out of your mind to us.
Thank you, Vance. Appreciate that.
Oh, yeah. And I had a question. The way Tamara is still around. What happened to Betty? How did she hang around?
Yeah, all his life, and as a matter of fact, Tamra actually did have an experience of a manifestation of Betty and Stewart at one point.
Oh.
They were toasting her with champagne glasses, and we did not understand what that meant. And now I'm looking back at it, and I'm thinking, oh wow, okay, yeah.
Awesome.
Super.
Well, wonderful. It's been a wonderful conversation. Jung, the Whites, your life again. At one point in time, everything else is a hologram, it seems. Yeah, not much else on my end. Yeah, if you get a chance, Ronnie, I saw the new Baz Luhrmann documentary, Epic with Elvis. You should go check it out. It's incredible. It's going to.
Okay, cool. Thank you. I just want to say to people that if you want more information about the Whites, please look up our book or check my YouTube channel where you'll find videos that give you more depth.
What's the address? Your YouTube channel? Is it just
Ronnie Pontiac?
Ronnie
Yeah.
Pontiac. Okay. Because I've got your publisher website, and of course we talk on Facebook. So that's all.
Oh, thanks. Is it White Crow?
White Crow.
Yeah, they publish this book, not Inner Traditions.
Yeah. But I usually send them your bio. I usually say it's the best bio out there.
Yeah, it's true.
On you with Inner Traditions.
Cool. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah, everybody check out the book. It's an incredible book. It's very rich, and it's good to know these very important mystics and individuals in our history. But yeah, we are at the end. Appreciate you guys being here, and we will wrap it up. Vance, thanks for keeping us company.
Oh, I've been enthralled, and it was amazing to be here. So thanks, Miguel, and especially thanks, Ronnie.
Oh, thanks, Vance. Thank you, Miguel. And to everybody that was here.
Yes. Great crowd there. Thanks for being here. Appreciate your support, your company, and the wonderful egregores you create. And we will sign off. And as I always like to say, write your own gospel, live your own myth. Take care, everybody. Join the redeemed Archon Sabaoth on his fool's journey with the Gnostic Tarot. Learn about the journey of the Gnostic Jesus. Follow Mary Magdalene in her quest for forbidden knowledge. Experience the celestial majesty of Bar Below, the Supreme Mother. Commune with the invisible spirit or the one of the Gnostics. Accompany the Gnostic sage Marcelina as she weaves primordial mysticism. Engage with Marcus the Magician and his coven of Gnostic witches. Experience the fall and liberation of Sophia in the simulation. Also discover the sagas of Abraxas, Simon Magus, Thunder, Valentinus, and more. In the end, see if Sabaoth and Sophia can unite to defeat the Demiurge. The Gnostic Tarot is perfect for divination and gnosis, the knowledge of the heart.
cast alchemical fire upon the world like Jesus in the Gospel of Thomas, or grasp the mysteries of existence like Mary in the Gnostic Gospels.